The lawyer's letter had been sitting on Martin Cooper's desk for 3 weeks before he finally opened it. It was thick, official-looking, the kind of correspondence that usually meant complications. At 54, Martin had learned that the best way to handle complications was to avoid them as long as possible. But eventually, avoidance stopped working. He opened the envelope one evening in his downtown office, the city lights of Portland spreading below his 20th floor window. Inside was a notification that the house he'd grown up in, the house he'd fled at 18, and never looked back, was now his. His father had died 6 months ago, and after probate and legal processes Martin hadn't bothered to follow, the property had been transferred to him as the only surviving heir. Martin stared at the address. 4782 Millbrook Road, a place he hadn't thought about in decades, a place he'd worked hard to forget. The house sat on 5 acres outside the city, in what had once been farmland but was now prime real estate. Martin's assistant had already done the research. The land was worth nearly $2 million. The house itself was worthless, a relic from the 1940s that hadn't been maintained in years. But the land was valuable. Martin made a decision quickly, the way he made all his decisions. He'd sell it. Demolish the house, clear the land, and sell to one of the developers who'd been circling the area for years. Clean, simple, profitable. He'd never have to see the place again. But first, he needed to assess the property. Make sure there were no complications that would affect the sale. Environmental issues? Structural problems that might cost extra to clear? That sort of thing. So on a gray Saturday morning in October, Martin drove out to Millbrook Road for the first time in 36 years. The property looked worse than he'd imagined. The long gravel driveway was overgrown with weeds. The house, a 2-story structure that had never been nice even when new, sagged visibly, its weathered wood siding gray and splintered. The barn his father had used for storage had partially collapsed. Everything spoke of neglect and decay. Martin parked his BMW at a safe distance and sat for a moment, gathering himself. He wore a navy suit despite it being Saturday. He always wore suits, armor against the world. His dark hair was graying at the temples, and fine lines creased his face, signs of a life spent working, 80-hour weeks and avoiding anything that resembled emotional vulnerability. This house represented everything he'd escaped. Poverty, violence, a father who drank too much and cared too little, a mother who'd left when Martin was 12, unable to take the abuse anymore, leaving her son behind because she'd barely been able to save herself. Martin had survived by being smart, working hard, and getting out the moment he turned 18. He'd put himself through college and law school, built a successful practice, made money, lots of money, enough that he never had to worry about poverty again. And now this place, this symbol of everything he'd overcome, would finally be erased, bulldozed, replaced with something new and clean and expensive. Martin got out of the car, his leather shoes crunching on the gravel. He approached the house cautiously, noting the broken windows, the door hanging slightly ajar. The place should have been condemned years ago. He pushed the door open and it groaned on rusty hinges. The interior was dark and musty, smelling of rot and abandonment. Martin pulled out his phone, using its flashlight to navigate the dim rooms. Everything was as he'd left it, more or less. The same threadbare furniture, the same stained walls, just older and more decrepit. In the kitchen, dishes still sat in the sink, covered in dust. His father's belongings were scattered throughout. Empty bottles, old newspapers, the detritus of a wasted life. Martin moved through the rooms mechanically, taking photos for his assistant to send to the demolition companies. He was heading upstairs when he heard it. A sound, small, almost imperceptible. A baby crying. Martin froze. He must have imagined it. The house had been empty for months. There couldn't be anyone here. But then he heard it again. Definitely a baby. And something else, a shuffling sound like small feet on old floorboards. His heart pounding, Martin climbed the stairs slowly. The crying was coming from one of the bedrooms, the one that used to be his. He pushed the door open and stopped, unable to process what he was seeing. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, stood pressed against the far wall. She wore a dress that had once been some color but was now just dirt brown, torn and ragged. Her dark hair was matted and tangled. Her face was smudged with grime, but it was her eyes that struck Martin. Huge, dark, filled with fear and something else. Fierce protectiveness, because in her arms she held a baby. An infant, maybe 6 months old, wrapped in a filthy blanket. "Don't come closer," the girl said, her voice shaking but determined. "Don't hurt us." Martin stood frozen in the doorway, his mind trying to make sense of this impossible scene.
"Who are you?"
"How did you get here?" "I live here." The girl's chin lifted defiantly, though Martin could see her trembling. "This is our home." "This house is abandoned." "It's been empty for months." "No, it hasn't. We've been here. Me and Emma." She clutched the baby tighter. Martin's legal mind started working through the implications. Squatters, probably, or runaways. He should call the police. Let social services handle it. This wasn't his problem. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way the girl stood, protecting the baby despite her obvious fear. Maybe it was the setting, his childhood room, where he'd once hidden from his father's rages. Maybe it was just that he was tired of always taking the easy route that involved the least emotional engagement. "I'm not going to hurt you," Martin said, keeping his voice calm. "My name is Martin. What's yours?" The girl hesitated. "Lily." "Okay, Lily, and that's Emma?" A slight nod. "Can you tell me how you got here?" "Where are your parents?" Lily's expression hardened. "Gone. Our mama left us here and didn't come back." "When?" "I don't know exactly." "A long time. Before Emma was born." Martin felt his stomach drop. "Lily, how old is Emma?" "Maybe half a year. I'm not sure." "And your mother left you here when she was pregnant?" "She said she'd come back. She said the man who lived here was gone and we could stay until she found us a real place. But she never came back." Lily's voice cracked slightly on the last words, but she didn't cry. Martin ran a hand through his hair, his mind reeling. This child had been living in this derelict house for at least 9 months. Pregnant and then caring for a baby, completely alone. The impossibility of it, the horror of it was overwhelming. "Lily, you need help. Food, medical care. This house isn't safe." "We're fine." "You're not fine. When did you last eat?" Lily's defiance wavered. "Yesterday. I found berries in the woods." "And before that?" Silence. "Let me help you," Martin said. "Please. I'm not going to call the police or take you somewhere scary. But you need food and care, both of you. Let me at least get you something to eat." Lily studied him for a long moment, weighing trust against desperation. Finally, she nodded slightly. "Okay, but I'm keeping Emma with me, always." "Of course." Martin drove them to a diner in town, very aware of how they must look. Him in his expensive suit, and these 2 children who looked like they'd walked out of another century. The hostess did a double-take but seated them without comment. In the better light of the diner, Martin could see just how bad things were. Lily was painfully thin, her arms stick-like. The baby, Emma, was lethargic in a way that suggested malnourishment. Both were filthy, covered in layers of dirt that told a story of weeks or months, without proper bathing. Lily ordered tentatively, "Just toast and eggs." But when the food came, she ate with the desperate hunger of someone truly starving. She also tried to feed small pieces of egg to Emma, who was clearly too young for solid food. "She needs milk," Martin said gently. "Baby formula. Has she been getting that?" Lily looked down. "I tried. I found some at the store in town, but..." She trailed off. "But you didn't have money to pay for it?" A small nod. Martin's heart ached. This child had been trying to steal baby formula to keep her sister alive. "It's okay. We'll get what she needs. Everything she needs." After they ate, Martin took them to a pharmacy. He bought formula, diapers, baby wipes, everything the pharmacist recommended. Then to a clothing store, where he had the staff help Lily pick out real clothes, jeans, shirts, a warm jacket, clothes for Emma too. The girl who worked the register kept glancing at Martin with obvious questions, but he ignored her, focused on Lily's wonder at having new, clean clothes. "Can I really keep these?" Lily asked, holding a soft purple sweater like it was made of gold. "Of course." "They're yours." By the time they left the store, Martin had spent nearly $1,000. He told himself it was just about getting them presentable before he called social services, that he was just making sure they were okay before he handed them over to the system. But even as he thought it, he knew it wasn't true. They went back to Martin's house, a modern condo in the Pearl district with floor-to-ceiling, windows and expensive furniture. Lily looked around with wide eyes but said nothing. Martin showed her the guest bathroom. You can take a shower. There's shampoo and soap, whatever you need. I'll watch Emma while you clean up. Lily clutched Emma tighter. I don't want to leave her. I understand. But you need to get clean and she needs a bath too. I promise I'll take good care of her. I won't leave this room. It took more convincing. But finally, Lily handed over the baby and disappeared into the bathroom. Martin sat on the couch holding Emma awkwardly. He'd never held a baby before. She was so small, so fragile. She looked up at him with solemn eyes and he felt something crack in his chest. When Lily emerged 40 minutes later, she was transformed. Her hair, clean and brushed, was actually a beautiful dark brown. Her skin, no longer caked with dirt, was pale but smooth. She looked like what she was, a little girl, no more than 7, who should have been in school and playing with friends, not surviving alone in an abandoned house. Your turn, Martin said, handing Emma back to Lily. He helped Lily bathe Emma in the kitchen sink, showing her how to support the baby's head, how to use the gentle baby soap he'd bought. Emma splashed a little, the most animated Martin had seen her, and Lily laughed, a sound that made her seem even younger. After Martin made dinner, pasta, simple but filling. They ate together at his dining table, and slowly Lily began to talk. Her mother, Rebecca, had been young and struggling. Lily's father had left before she was born. Rebecca had worked wherever she could, but money was always tight. When she got pregnant with Emma by a different man who also left, things got desperate. Mama heard about the empty house from someone, Lily said, twirling pasta on her fork. She said we could stay there until she saved enough money for a real place. But then Emma came early and Mama was sick after. And she said she needed to go to the hospital, but we couldn't come because they'd take us away. So she left you alone. She said it would just be a few days, that she'd come back. But she didn't. And you've been there ever since? 9 months? I guess so. I don't really know. The days kind of blur together. Martin felt anger building. Not at this child, but at the mother who'd abandoned her. At a system that let children fall through the cracks like this. How did you survive? How did you take care of Emma? I remembered how Mama took care of me when I was little. I found food where I could. There's a church that puts out food on Wednesdays, and I'd take extra. Sometimes people left cans and things near the dumpsters. Behind the grocery store, Lily's voice was matter-of-fact, as if this was just normal life. When Emma came, it was harder. But I figured it out. You figured it out, Martin repeated. This 7-year-old had somehow kept herself and an infant alive for months. It was miraculous and horrifying in equal measure. After dinner, Martin set up the guest room with the new clothes and supplies. Lily put Emma down in the center of the bed, surrounded by pillows so she couldn't roll off. You're safe here, Martin said. Both of you. For tonight, just rest. Lily looked at him with those 2 old eyes. Are you going to call someone? To take us away? Martin should say yes. Should tell her that in the morning, he'd contact social services, get them into the system, make sure they got proper care. But he found himself saying, not tonight. Tonight you're safe. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. Lily nodded, seeming to accept this. Thank you, Mr. Martin. Just Martin is fine. After Lily and Emma were settled, Martin sat in his living room, staring out at the city lights, trying to process the day. This morning, he'd driven out to assess a property for demolition. Now he had 2 abandoned children sleeping in his guest room. He should call social services, should let the professionals handle it. But he'd seen enough of the system over his years as a lawyer to know how it worked. Lily and Emma would be separated, probably. Foster care, if they were lucky. But the system was overloaded, underfunded. Who knew what would happen to them? And there was something else. Something about Lily's fierce determination to protect her sister, about the way she'd survived impossible circumstances, that reminded Martin of someone, reminded him of himself. Over the next few days, Martin learned more of their story. Rebecca had indeed been hospitalized, had died there from complications related to childbirth and untreated infections. No one had known about her children. She'd been estranged from her family, had no close friends. Lily and Emma had simply fallen through every crack in the system. Martin hired a private investigator to find relatives. There were none willing to take the children. Rebecca's parents were dead, and her siblings wanted nothing to do with her children. He consulted with lawyers about his options. He could turn the children over to state custody, or impossibly, he could try to keep them. "You understand what you're suggesting?" his colleague Sandra asked. "You're a 54-year-old single man who works 80 hours a week. You have no experience with children, and you want to become a guardian to two traumatized kids, one of whom is an infant?" "Yes." "Why?" Martin thought about the house on Millbrook Road, about the boy he'd been, scared and alone, dreaming of escape, about how he'd made it out through sheer determination and a few people who'd helped along the way, teachers, a coach, a professor who'd believed in him. "Because someone should," he said simply. "Because they deserve a chance. And because I can." The process wasn't easy. There were home studies, background checks, interviews. Martin had to prove he could provide a stable home. He hired a nanny to help with Emma. He reduced his work hours. He turned his guest room into a proper bedroom for Lily, painted purple at her request. And slowly, day by day, they became something like a family. Lily started school, catching up quickly despite missing months of education. She was bright, hungry for learning, soaking up everything her teachers offered. Emma thrived with regular meals and medical care, growing stronger and more active. Martin learned to change diapers and read bedtime stories. He learned what foods Lily liked and didn't like. He learned the sound of Emma's different cries and what each one meant. He also kept the house on Millbrook Road, at least for now. He couldn't bring himself to demolish the place where he'd found these children, where their lives had intersected with his. Instead, he hired a contractor to make it safe and habitable, thinking maybe one day it could be something useful, a shelter perhaps, or transitional housing for families in crisis. A year after that October morning, Martin stood in his living room, watching Lily help Emma take her first wobbly steps. Lily cheered with each attempt, encouraging her sister with the same fierce protectiveness she'd shown from the beginning. "Look, Martin," Lily called. "She's walking!" Martin smiled, something that came more easily now than it had a year ago. "I see. She's doing great." Emma fell on her bottom, looked surprised, then laughed. Lily scooped her up, and both girls dissolved into giggles. Sandra stopped by that evening, ostensibly to drop off some documents, but really to check on her friend and his unconventional family. "You look different," she observed, watching Martin easily comfort Emma when she got fussy. "Different how?" "Happy. I don't think I've ever seen you actually happy before." Martin considered this. She was right. For decades, he'd been successful, respected, financially secure. But happy? That had never been part of the equation. "I didn't know I was missing this," he admitted. "I spent so long running from my past, building walls, keeping everything at arm's length. I thought that was strength. And now? Now I think maybe real strength is letting people in. Letting yourself care, even though it's scary. Any regrets? About not demolishing the house and taking the money?" Martin looked at Lily and Emma, at these two children who'd somehow become his whole world. Not even for a second. He'd bought his childhood home intending to erase it, to finally be done with that chapter of his life. Instead, he'd found something he didn't know he needed. Purpose, connection, family. Not the family he'd been born into, but the one he chose. The one that chose him back. Sometimes the things we're running from are exactly where we need to be. Sometimes the properties we plan to demolish hold treasures we never expected. And sometimes the most valuable thing we can build isn't made of money or success or carefully maintained emotional distance. Sometimes it's just love. Messy, complicated, terrifying, wonderful love. Martin had spent 54 years keeping the world at arm's length. And then 2 children in a forgotten house had changed everything. He'd thought he was there to tear something down. Instead, he'd built something new. Not on the ruins of his past, but alongside them, acknowledging where he'd come from while creating something better for the future, for Lily and Emma, and unexpectedly for himself.